Hi, mentalists. Welcome. Good evening. Today we're going to be talking about Kathleen Akins' A Bat Without Qualities, which is a terrific paper that she wrote responding to Thomas Nagel's paper about bats. So Nagel argues, if you recall, that it's really hard for us to imagine what it's like to be a bat, to imagine things from a bat's point of view as the bat is, say, flying through the air, catching insects using sonar. Now, Nagel formulated this as a possible problem for physicalism, because it seems like physicalism is of the opinion that if you can give a complete physical description of the world, then you'll give a complete description of the world, period. But if Nagel is correct, then you could have a complete physical description of a bat, but still not be able to imagine its point of view, to have bats' experiences understood from our own point of view. So Akins is going to acknowledge that Nagel's challenge may well be understood as a problem of scientific description. But Akins is going to argue that Nagel is misformulating the problem. So for her, structural, functional, and relational properties won't be enough to fill in the intrinsic properties, or at least that's how the story goes, right? Because, you know, physics can describe all of the structural properties, maybe cognitive science and, neuroscience can describe the functional properties of cognition, and relational properties are properties that we as beings have to the world. And, you know, we can map all of those out using scientific description, but the challenge to materialism goes that those won't be enough to fill in the intrinsic properties, the qualitative properties, the what it's like properties, so on and so forth. Now, Akins says, well, suppose that we could hypothetically put the bat's point of view on film. What if you could capture the bat's experience with, surround sound and a curved screen and colors and sounds corresponding to the bat's experience. So suppose that we preserved all of the spatial information and all the timing information that the bat was gleaning from its sonar insect hunting experience, where color in this case would stand for the sound frequency that the bat hears. And we presented that on this 3D screen with surround sound. Maybe we're wearing like special goggles or something. Now, an objection to this imaginary film that we should be able to produce if physicalism is correct and eventually we have a complete theory of bat experiences, the objection goes, doesn't this film leave out a lot of the bat's point of view, right? So we see like lots of these random colors pop up on the screen in varying patterns, and we watch this film and at the end maybe we think to ourselves, okay, what was that? Right? Isn't that leaving out something about what it's like to be a bat? Bats' experiences aren't like that, we think to ourselves. We just don't seem to understand the images that are projected on the screen or, feel what it is that the bat feels as it's wheeling through the air and having, insects buzz by and sensing other bats in the distance and trees and stuff like that. It just doesn't seem like this surround visual experience would capture that, because there's something off. We're representing the bat's experience that is sonar with colors, for example. Surely the objection goes, that's not what it's qualitatively like to be a bat. Now Akins says, yeah, that makes sense as an objection. Films are useful to humans. Human films are useful to other humans for grasping a point of view, she says, for two reasons. One is that we share a similar visual system, right? So if I show you a film of my experience, like if I take a film camera and I go skydiving or something, or I take a film camera and I go mountain biking and I have, the GoPro on my helmet and doing all cool stuff, you have a similar visual system to me. So when I show you the film of my experience, you will be able to translate all of that sensory stimulation in a similar way to the way that I translated it when I was in that situation. So the other thing that films do, besides, you know, depend on our shared visual systems, are that they allow us to artificially recreate the visual input. So the GoPro on my head is artificially recreating the input that's coming into my eyes, right? And then, you know, the GoPro is recording the relevant information that I can output by means of a projector or a screen or something like that, that you would then sit in front of. So you would be able to share some aspects of my experience as I'm, you know, doing this active mountain biking. So now think about the bat film, right? If we watch the bat film, we interpret the spectral cues, Akins says, as for a human visual system. And it's this system, it's our human visual system, that's activated by these representations of, you know, colors on the screen, the surround, you know, visual screen that we're watching, the surround film of the bat's experience. So we're interpreting these colors on the screen with a human visual system. They're going to have the meanings for the human visual system that those colors ordinarily do. And so when applied to the bat experience, they're going to be kind of confusing. So Akins says, because of the differences in the bat auditory system and the human visual system, the qualia in the film, so in this case, the colors and their relevant locations on the screen and things like that, those qualia, the colors, won't be able to stand for what bats actually sense. The fiction of the film, Akins says, is that these colors are what the bat qualitatively experiences. For us, colors represent certain visual properties. Maybe we have to do some work to figure out what exactly those visual properties are that our color experiences stand for. But all the film can show us are meaningless, Akins says, albeit colored visual events. So she says, you know, think about if you are looking at an abstract painting, you know, that's not representing anything. You might have been of the opinion that the colors can be meaningless, that they can stand for nothing. Akins is going to argue, though, that actually the colors always stand for something. They don't necessarily stand for objects, but colors have meanings for us. They are representing a certain property. So even an abstract painting has some representational quality to it, no matter what we do. Colors have a direction, an intention for us. They have a purpose, like a thing that they're doing. So it's the same thing with the bat film. If we see blues and reds in the bat film, for a human visual system, that means certain things. But it's not like that's what the bat's experiences are going to be, right? The bat has its own sensations that stand for things that are significant to the bat. So Akins argues that no parts of phenomenal consciousness are merely qualitative. All parts of phenomenal consciousness, for her, represent the world. All have intentionality. Here's a quote. We cannot expect to understand the bat's point of view without access to both the representational and qualitative parts of its experience, unquote. So she's suggesting that we just can't separate the qualitative from the representational. All of the qualitative experiences that we have and all of the qualitative experiences that the bats have carry with them a sense of what they're about, what they pick out in the world. Here's another quote. It is not for lack of the quality of the bat's experience that his world eludes us, says Akins. Even if ex hypothesi, we were able to produce in ourselves the very feel of the bat's experience, its qualitative aspect, we would not understand the bat's point of view. Watching the swirl of colors, those sensations lack their proper representational content, unquote. So she's thinking that even if we were able to, you know, activate bat qualitative experiences in us, they wouldn't be able to stand for the things that they stand for the bat, because we have different systems. And so even if we were able to have the qualitative experiences the bats were having, we wouldn't understand the bat's point of view. That's what she's saying. And that's one of the reasons why this film seems meaningless to us, why we can't take it as a simulation of the bat's point of view. It lacks kind of the relevant representational content. We don't have that immediate access to the representational content by means of these color properties of the film. So the trouble is we can't separate, according to Akins, the qualitative and the representational features of experience. Here's another quote. We imagined, or at least we thought we could imagine, an unchanging substrate of pure sensation, a substrate analogous to the physical paint upon the canvas, onto which the bat's meaning could be affixed. The problem, however, is that our experience of abstract art does not provide a genuine example of what we need, the separation of content from mere color, unquote. So think back to the abstract painting. She's suggesting that, you might have thought that the paint is sort of like pure paint. We have an analogy to it in our own visual system. The pure paint of our own visual system is like the colors and shades of the qualitative features of our experience. But she's saying that, none of those colors are purely abstract. They all stand for things. There is no mere color for Akins. We just can't, like every qualitative experience is necessarily representational. She has a view of consciousness on which it's representational all the way down. Every bit of qualitative experience is also intentional. As a result, it's going to turn out that Akins is more optimistic, surprisingly, about solving the problem of phenomenal consciousness scientifically. We can, Akins thinks, describe representational properties of consciousness using science. Here's a quote. Because our own difficulties turn around individual sensations, around the feel of sensory events, the pain of a migraine headache, the azure blue of the Mediterranean, the essence of flamingo pink, we infer that the main stumbling block to understanding an alien creature must be the inaccessibility of those qualia, unquote. But if it turns out that the qualia and the representational content of the qualia are inseparable, then by learning about the representational content, we are learning about the qualitative aspects of conscious experience. By learning what it is that animals, aliens, robots are representing, we can learn ourselves what it is like to be that kind of creature. So it's wrong to infer that the stumbling block to understanding an alien creature is the inaccessibility of their qualia, for two reasons. One, quote, the isolation of those sensations doesn't thereby produce sensations that stand apart from our representational conceptual schemes. Isolation does not distill qualia from content. It is not the intrinsic nature of sensations per se that makes for trouble, unquote. So communicating our experience is equally a problem of communicating our representational states. That's what she's saying. Just because you can pick out, red conceptually or maybe phenomenologically, you can think of just the qualitative experience red by itself, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're separating it from its content for Akins. Same thing with pitch. Just because you can separate, like, I don't know, a high C note from other notes that you might hear doesn't mean that you're distilling the qualitative from the content of that sound. Just because you can, distill the taste of just the saltiness, the salty part of a meal, doesn't mean that saltiness has no content to it. So communicating what our experiences are is equally a problem of communicating what our experiences are about for Akins. Secondly, she says, a point of view is not a jumble of qualia. Quote, consciousness is systematic, representational, and intentional. Moreover, such parts are not optional parts of our conscious experience. Rather, these properties are constitutive of a point of view, unquote. So what she's saying is that when we think about what it's like to be something or someone, she doesn't think that that point of view is just a jumble of experiential pieces, like building blocks. She thinks that consciousness is in its very nature constitutively about things, even if they're egocentric things, right? So if my temperature sensation is about how comfortable I am and whether there's any changes in temperature in my environment, those are kind of the two main things that your temperature sensation system cares about. Those still are properties, things that I'm sort of paying attention in the world, and my consciousness of temperature is constitutively about things like that, egocentric things like that. So, quote, given that our own phenomenal experience is the starting point for an explanation of the very notion of a point of view, and that our own experience is not a mere collection of qualia, we must assume that the same holds for the bat, unquote. The thought being that, you know, when we're thinking about our own point of view, if it turns out that our own point of view is representational all the way down as well, not a mere collection of qualia, then it must also be true for the bat. The bat also has a representational system. Its conscious experience is also inherently representational. Therefore, you know, we can study bats by studying what it is that they're conscious of, what it is that they're representing in the world. So says Akins, quote, if introspection does not yield any clear distinction between the representational and qualitative aspects of experience, that is, if we can't tell the difference just by thinking about our own experience, what a part of this is representational, what part of this is qualitative, then, this is continuing the quote, we do not know a priori what insights or even what kinds of insights will result from empirical investigation, unquote. So basically, we can keep doing science. The problem for Akins is that we don't really understand our own representational capacities. She asks us to imagine, you know, that we're sitting in a room full of the stuff that's in our room, and then told, okay, now imagine the same scene, but imagine it as if everything represented something else, as if all of your sensations were representing different things besides the stuff in the room. Or imagine that you're seeing the same stuff, like you're experiencing the same qualitative experiences, but now with the meanings that a bat would have for them. Both of those tasks seem really hard for Akins, and Akins says that one of the reasons that they're hard is that we're not sure what aspects of our qualitative experience we have to like delete or replace in order to do the thing that we're being instructed to do, right? What would it be to imagine the thing that I'm being asked to imagine? We're not even sure how to follow the instruction. So Akins diagnoses this as a problem that we have telling the difference between our representational and qualitative aspects of experience. Really, it's because she thinks that there is no difference. So of course, we're not going to be able to introspect a difference. But even if you suppose that there is a difference, it turns out that introspecting it is quite difficult. So because of that, she thinks we can't tell before we start doing science what we might learn by doing science about our representational systems and about our qualitative experiences as a result. So Akins thinks that in fact, I might learn things about my own point of view by doing science, given that the nature of my representational experience may be obscure to myself. So think about all of the things that are unclear about your own experience. Suppose, have you ever been like walking around and you noticed that there was like a pebble in your shoe? And you didn't notice it right away, but you eventually came to realize that there was a pebble in your shoe, and you try to think back on the exact moment that you realized there was a pebble in your shoe and you're not quite sure, like there isn't kind of like a beginning or end of when you were aware of it. Or have you ever been like really concentrated on something and all of a sudden you realize there's really loud noise going on that's been going on for a while, It started at some point, but you hadn't noticed? Or have you ever like driven home and you get home and you realize you don't remember half of what happened on your drive home and you get a little spooked because you were on autopilot? If you've had any or all of those experiences, then you'll know what it is to be confused about what was a part of your experience in the first place. So Akins says, by doing science, I might be able to learn stuff about my own qualitative experience, about my own representational capacities, about what's going on when these things happen. By doing science, we learn things about, for example, inattentional blindness, which we're all subject to. When we're paying attention to one thing very carefully, other things seem to not feature in our conscious experience. We can't report about them. It's almost like we're blind to them. And by studying this phenomenon cognitive scientifically, we can then start to describe what is actually happening in our experience. That's something you might think. Although I am putting a couple of words in her mouth. So if I've said anything wrong here, take that as my fault and not her fault. So what it turns out is that we don't know what science is going to tell us yet about consciousness, but for Akins, there are good reasons to wait. One final thing to think about that she brings up in her paper, which is kind of interesting. In part of her paper, she's talking about the vision of eagles. And it turns out that eagles, which are birds of prey, have multiple foveal points, so multiple points of focus in their eyes. They have kind of a horizontal foveal area. So they've got a couple of places, as opposed to our singular place in their eyeball, where a lot of information is transmitted to the visual system, and where a lot of the visual information is kind of like focused. It's like the focal area. That's our fovea. We have one per eyeball, but it turns out that these birds of prey have two. And Akins asks, what is it like to be that kind of bird, right? Are you switching between the fovea that you're focusing on? You know, one that's like closer, one that's further away. Like, what is it like to be something with eagle vision? Are you switching between the types of focus, the sort of close and far away, the peripheral vision, the near vision? Like, are they sequential or are they simultaneous? And when she starts asking about that, she then turns her attention to the human visual system. And she says, well, given that our visual system has only one fovea, is it possibly that we're thinking about our conscious experience as informed by our visual sensation? And is that maybe a mistake? Our visual sensation seems to be very specific, right? So like if I focus my attention on one object, the entire view changes. So this isn't happening here, but like if I do this, the focus of my camera will change depending on what's in the shot, right? Our eyes do a similar thing. And it might seem like our conscious experience is like that. Our attention is like a spotlight. It highlights one thing at a time, kind of like our visual system does. But Akins asks, what if our conscious experience isn't like that? What if our conscious experience is more simultaneous? Like it might be possible that the eagle doesn't switch between its foveas as it attends to the world. Maybe it's just seeing everything at once from both of its foveal areas. Maybe it's all integrated into parts of its experience. And if that's true, then maybe our own spotlight theory for consciousness is off, even if the metaphor makes sense. Perhaps that's not borne out in the science. And so if we were to do science, we might find out some things about consciousness and how it works that we wouldn't be able to introspectively know. At the moment, we're not exactly sure what to say about our conscious experience. Like, at what moment do I notice the pebble? I have trouble describing what it's like to have a pebble in your shoe before you fully realize that you have a pebble in your shoe. Presumably there is something that's like. But how do I verbalize that? Akins is more optimistic that science can inform our sensation of what it's like than not. And so, in summary, this is her response to Nagel's bat argument. Nagel might be wrong, that a physical description of the universe won't tell us anything about what it's like to be a bat. Now, what do you think about this paper? Do you have any objections to it? Do you have questions about some of the terms she uses? Do you think that qualia is inherently intentional? Is it inherently about something? Anyway, I'd love to discuss this with you later on. Thank you for tuning in. See you soon. Bye.